Welcome everyone to the Northeast Indiana Basketball Summit. I am your host, Ben Smith, joined by my co-host, Jeff Metzger. Before introducing our guest, we want to thank Feel for the Game for providing the platform to have all these presentations live and available for replay. You can check out all the resources over at feelforthegame.com. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Aseem Rastogi, I think that's correct, from Brandeis. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Coach comes to us from Fairfax, Virginia. Graduated in high school 2006, high school 2006, graduated from Old Dominion in 2010, got a master's degree from Oklahoma in 2012. Says here he currently teaches, is a regional leadership coach, and he's a writer for a couple different outlets. I'm going to ask him about that in a little bit. His experience as a coach or in the, athletic departments includes VCU from 2012 to 2013 as a director of player personnel. He also took over as the interim director of basketball operations. He spent 7 years coaching high school basketball before coming to Brandeis. He developed 9 all-district players at South County High School. They set the single game record for points, single season record for made threes, assists, and points. Thanks for joining us today, Aseem. Before we get to the topic, tell us a little bit more about some of the things you're involved in. Like I mentioned, Lead 'em Up, Per Hoop Stats, Fast Model. What are some of those things, and how does that get you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I appreciate you guys putting this on. I think this is fantastic, and the amount of learning that's been taking place since we've all sort of been on lockdown and quarantine or whatever you want to call it, it's just been amazing. So kudos to you guys for getting this together. A lot of varied experiences. I think, her hoop stats I've sort of taken a break from, and Lead 'em Up I'm still going really strong with. It's a fantastic organization, fantastic group, and I count myself blessed to be a part of the regional leadership team. So working with Adam Bradley, who's the founder, Kyle Kavanaugh down in Louisiana. We have another one named Tucker in Iowa. Taylor's out in California. So we have people all over the country just working with teams on developing the leaders needed to win. And where a lot of my theory and stuff on coaching and my philosophy comes from is from the curriculum with Lead 'em Up and my involvement with them. Even when I was a head coach, we were the first program in the state of Virginia to use Lead 'em Up. And then when I was transitioning up here to Brandeis this past summer, Adam asked me to jump on with the team. So really, really fortunate there. And then one of the new projects that I'm really excited about is started a coaching consulting group called Essential Coaching, which we can talk about. We'll talk about a little bit later when I share my screen, but I'm really, really pumped about that. Have some great members in our small groups, and just really diving into the essential pieces of coaching. That's why we call it Essential Coaching, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Kyle Kavanaugh and I starting that over the last 5 weeks or so has just been a whirlwind. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit more about competitive practice design as I get my co-host back in here, but screen share should be all set to go. Floor is yours.
Awesome. Let me get this pulled up here. Can you all see that?
I can see it right now, yep.
All right. And it just got a little bit bigger there?
Yep.
Great. So like Ben said, my name is Aseem Rastogi. Aseem, like the thing that holds your shirt together. And I am an assistant coach at Brandeis University. Just finished my first season there. Like Ben said, I was a high school coach actually just for the last 4 years in Virginia, but over the last 7 coaching, AAU, high school, middle school, you name it, in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Here's all my contact information. If anybody wants to take that, feel free to follow me on Twitter. Follow the hashtag Essential Coaching. And there's my email and my phone. I'm always available to talk basketball, to help in any way I can. I think one of the things that has come out of this time is a willingness to share the game and a willingness to share just in general that I'm not sure existed before, or at least it wasn't as overt. So really just happy that we're able to do this. And if anybody wants to connect about basketball, about practice planning, culture, anything to do with essential coaching, please feel free to reach out. I'm around. So I'll leave that up there for a couple more seconds, and then we'll get going. All right. So when we talk about competitive practice planning, competitive practices, and really just practice philosophy in general, there's some considerations that I like to throw out to coaches, but that I also take into account when I'm planning practice, or now as an assistant, suggesting for practice. And I think that's a big thing too. Like, I know that there's a lot of assistant coaches that watch these and they're like, well, I'm not the head coach, I can't do that. But what I have found is that, when we say like think like a head coach, this is what this is. So are we considering the human component of who we have in the gym and who we have as people? And so if you look here on the right of your screen, that's our pyramid that we use in essential coaching, that sort of drives all of our decision making and all of our conversations. So the human component comes down to essentially recruiting and relationships. And recruiting is not player acquisition so much as it is winning the hearts and minds of your players. And you'll see why that's important, even more so than in general conversation here when we get to what really like the meat of a competitive practice could look like, and what it did look like for me in my program and what we're doing at Brandeis. We have to understand that they're people first. And if we don't have the relationships, if we haven't recruited their hearts and minds and had that next connection, that we really can't push them to where we need them to go. And so starting everything with the human component, ensuring that our players, safety is number one, the relationships that we have with them, the ability to give them feedback, knowing how they take feedback, all of those things are number one, the most essential thing that you can do when you're talking about building your practice. A lot of times, like, we'll pick up a drill and just do it, not realizing like the teaching behind it, the feedback behind it, and then how our kids, we can adapt it for them instead of just adopting it. Attacking the slack. So that's a word, that's a phrase that has multiple meanings. I think there's kids that will attack the slack on our staff and try to go to the path of least resistance, especially if they're not getting what they want with the head coach. It's not really what I'm talking about with this. This is more of us as coaches being able to hack our standards. And by hacking, it's, what companies do. They pay people to break into their firewalls and, ensure that their security is as tight as possible. It's the same thing. We want to keep everything in our huddle. We want to make sure that our standards are the most important part. And so being able to attack the slack in our standards with how we plan practice, that's super important as it pertains to the ability to really get our players better and really make our team better. Competing doesn't necessarily mean, butting heads. It's striving together. So I'm going to bring my best because I know Ben's going to bring his best, and I want to push Ben and I want Ben to push me, but we're going to get better together. That's a really important distinction to make, especially when we talk about competitiveness. Competitiveness does have to do with winning and losing, but we want our players to see each other and our opponents as training partners. Again, to attack that slack, to hack our standards. Are we living what we said we wanted to be about? I like to build every day from 1-on-1 to 5-on-5. The game is played, it's 1-on-1 in the context of 5-on-5. And so if we can do that, if we can show the context, if we can create the environment where players can be challenged, where players can see the context of their decision making in multiple different ways, whether it's just me and a buddy, me and two buddies, me and three buddies, or our entire team, building up 1-on-1 to 5-on-5 and using that to create context will make our players better in practice. We will see an upward trend and growth throughout the season. How do we do what happens the most? So Mike Lynch is a really great coach. I actually worked with his team this year as their lead 'em up coach. He's up here in Leicester, Massachusetts. And one of the things he did this summer was a scores study, or a scores created study, and going back and seeing how they actually scored. And I know, like, at the college level, Synergy will do some of that for you. But I think sometimes as coaches, we have an idea of how we want to score, but we're scoring completely differently. So understanding what happens the most and then manufacturing that over and over and over again. So how we do what happens the most, we're the best at that. That's what we want to do. And I'll show you some examples here in a minute. And then I'm a business teacher. That's kind of my role outside of coaching. And I'm all about return on investment. So we're investing these 2 hours today. I've invested 3 hours in planning this practice. What's my ROI? What's our ROI as a program? What's our return on that time we've invested? Are we actually getting better or are we just getting sweaty? So just some things to consider. So we can't really talk about practice planning unless we talk about pillars of play. And these are my pillars of play. Everybody's are different. I'm working with a few coaches right now on their pillars of play, and I love to work with anybody on theirs to see if we, develop mine even further and help them develop theirs. But we wanted the 4 S's: sprint, space, seek, and shot selection. And there you see some of the descriptors of those things. But this was our roadmap to what we were doing in practice and how we wanted to do it. So this, along with our game model of the 4 phases of the game, this was everything. If we didn't get 3 to 4 of these in one of the things we were doing and 3 to 4 of the phases of the game in something we were doing, we scrapped it. And so that really narrows down and it really narrows the focus back to the essential things that we're trying to do. And so it makes practice planning pretty simple as far as what you do, but the way that you teach, the way that you communicate, the things that you're holding your team to, the standard that you're holding your team to, that becomes very, very narrow. And it goes back to this idea of attacking the slack. So where are we slacking in our game model? How's our spacing? Are we sharing the ball? Are we seeking those advantages? Are we even sprinting the floor? And a lot of that comes back to the human component and the leadership and character of who's influencing what's happening on our team. What are our habits right now? Are we sprinting the floor or are we just getting by? So I'm not going to coach anything tactical until we've taken care of the behavioral part. And to me, those are decisions that need to be made by our players and by our coaching staff about what we're going to be about. And so, again, that's sort of a separate topic of conversation. And again, like that's where the art of coaching comes in is, do I know my team? Do I know my players? What can they handle and where can I push them? And that goes back to the human component as well. So just some practice flow. So there were 4 things that I wanted to be present in every practice. And that I think, when we think about the game of basketball, these are all things that are prevalent and present in the game itself. And so if we're truly going to go to more of a game sense approach and more of preparation for game and for a game or games, and really like teaching our students, our learners, how to play the game, these things need to be present. So competition, decision making, shooting, and transition. I'm a firm believer that shooting is the only skill that needs its own time. Everything else we can get, we can combo it together. We can layer drills, we can layer activities, but I want to make time for shooting. I'm a big believer in that. And whether it's right or wrong, that's my belief. And again, coaches can have difference of opinion. And that's why there's no one way to do this. Again, emphasizing overtly the human component. So our relationships, are we recruiting? Are we making that next connection with our kids? Are they making the next connections together? Anson Dorrance talks about small societies a lot. So maybe you have a post group and a guard group. That's a small society. The top of your zone, the back line of the zone, those are small societies. How are they creating relationships? How are they recruiting one another every single day to our standard and to our program? Everything should have a time and or score. So I don't believe in breaks necessarily in practice. I think, we put up a time for a free throw game. We'll call it at 1 minute. That's their break to go get water, and I'm explaining the next thing as they're getting water. I think it breeds a little bit of urgency. And then I also think like when we're in a timeout, we only have a minute and you're getting water. So we've just come off the floor. You need to be able to listen. I'm going to try to keep my feedback. I'm going to try to keep my instructions to less than that minute because I only have a minute in the games. So practicing those timeouts without actually saying, hey, we're going to practice a timeout now. So it's kind of the rep without the rep, or the rep, um, you know, the rep mentally, they don't know that that's a timeout, but we're preparing for that moment. um, Engaging the mind first. I'm going to show you some examples of some mental transition games. And this is something that I have been doing for a couple of years. And I heard Brian McCormick talk about it first. And then just recently on the basketball podcast with Chris Oliver, Lisa Tomaitis was on there, and she's the head coach of the Canadian national women's team. And she was talking about how they use transition games every day in film. They use them in practice. So it just kind of affirmed for me, like, hey, we're doing something here that needs to be done, and it's engaging of the mind. And so, even today we had a meeting with our coaching staff, and one of the things that we were talking about was, how do we engage our kids right now, because we're all over the country. And we were talking about showing them X's and O's, showing them a play, and asking them to predict what happens. And my head coach was like, well, what if we show them a clip and we ask them to look at the bench right before we send them back out on the court, and they have to go execute a play or something. And it speaks to this, right? The biggest problems are not at this skills and schemes level of this pyramid. They're at that human component level of engagement, of the relationships on our team, of the trust on our team. And so if we can spend more time building that in practice, then we're going to be better served in games. And I think that's where the overt part of the human component comes into play as well. And then, most of us only have a couple hours. We don't have the court to ourselves. I know at Brandeis, we have a track that goes around our court, softballs over in the corner, hitting in their cages. So we only have a couple of hours. We got to activate multiple pillars. We got to collapse our time frames and get in and out. Our kids are paying $75,000 to go to school. They're there to be students too, first. And we can't keep them there for 3 hours because we have to get stuff done. So just about being efficient, being essential, and emphasizing that human component, and really just, at a pace that we want to play. So in terms of high yield concepts, so that's what we're going to go into now. We're going to sort of transfer into this high yield concept idea. And so in planning, I don't believe that, and this is something that I heard Rick Torbett say a while ago. I was a read and react guy, but he talked about, like, I never tell the kids how to rotate. They need to figure it out. And what he would say is, like, I'm too stupid to figure it out. You guys got it. And so, I adopted that. I was like, yeah, I'm too dumb. I don't even know how to rotate this drill, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to communicate about it right now. Figure it out. And when we do that enough, that figure it out mentality, a lot of times our kids would just jump into it, and they would self-organize. So as much as can be self-organized, that's what we want to do. And so that goes back again to the relationships that you have, and the ability for your kids to communicate in those small societies. So if we split them up in a group of 3, and we're saying, hey, you're going to go do whatever drill it is in your group of 3, how are you going to rotate? Figure it out. You got 15 seconds, talk about it, go. And so I do that with our college players as well. And it's something that it's really interesting to watch who steps up, who can organize other people. And those are leadership reps. We talked about lead them up at the beginning, and that's something that we talk about, is getting your reps. So that's a way to build it into practice. The playing rotation, like the playing time rotation, I believe is irrelevant in practice. One of the things we talk about a lot in essential coaching is, when you talk about your vision and your mission and your ability to communicate that, is what you're trying to do accessible for every kid on your team? So can your 13th player access what you're trying to teach? Or is it just reserved for your starting 5, and everybody else kind of has to do their own thing or pick it up where they can? Now, that's not saying we teach to the lowest. That's saying we teach everybody, and everybody gets reps, so that throughout the course of time, we create this S curve that then leads us to where everybody is pushed up. And so when our standard becomes the most important thing, our rotation becomes the least important thing, because our standard should be attainable based on who you are. That's the human component, your skill level, and what you bring to the team. So if we have a standard that we're going to make the extra pass, the 13th kid can do that just like the top kid. So it's really up to you to figure out what your standards are, and then take your rotation and make sure that everybody gets first team reps. So if we're truly taking a game sense approach here, where we're using small sided games, where we're using advantage disadvantage situations, it can't just be the starting five against the second five. Mix them in, let them pick their teams, and I'll show you how I did that in practices at the high school level, and that we're doing a little bit of that at the college level. We're going to do more of it, I think, as we move forward into year 2 of me being on staff. Getting everybody to the point where they're comfortable doing what we're asking them to do. As a teacher, we're always anticipating misconceptions. So understanding that what the questions are going to be requires knowing your kids, and then building that into your instructions. So a lot of times I'll give purposefully vague instructions, knowing that there's going to be misconceptions, because I want them to be engaged and ask those questions, because they're on this process of discovery all the time. So if we can help them discover it, they take ownership over it, and then it becomes permanent. Objective, controllable feedback, and that goes back to the standards. So I've told my kids there's a promise that I make to every player, is that I'm never going to give you feedback about something you can't control. And that's infinitely harder, because it's very easy to ask the question, hey, did you win? And how many points did you score? Those are generally the two questions that get asked after every basketball game. And then if it's not enough, or if they lost, the follow-up question is, what happened? Well, none of that stuff is controllable. And so that's really negative feedback to players. So I've made a promise that I'm only going to give objective, controllable feedback, but then we have to be able to very clearly spell out what is and is not controllable. And that's something, again, that's another topic of conversation for maybe later. Going back to that hacking idea, are we hacking our standards? Are we testing them? Are we seeing where the holes are in the firewall, and then being able to plug those up permanently, or at least as permanently as possible? Are there safety concerns? Checks for understanding. One of the worst checks for understanding that I am very guilty of using, and that I've tried to not use anymore, is, does that make sense? That is a terrible question to ask, because a lot of times, and this is why Dwight is on here, that creates the bobblehead effect. Like, yeah, that makes sense, and then they have no idea what they're supposed to do. Instead, one of the phrases I really like to use is, what questions do you have? It creates an opening for kids to ask a question in a very vulnerable time period, but with very little pressure on them. And then they should have a question. It encourages them to ask. Another one that we use a lot is like we're trying to get them to agree with us. It really doesn't make sense to do that, because if they disagree, they need a safe place in which to disagree. So I'm going to show you now. Let me stop sharing here for a second and reshare. Okay. Can you all see this?
Yep, we're all good.
All right, perfect. So this is the second day of practice. So I think a lot of times there's a sort of a trepidation from coaches, like, oh, well, we got to get all this stuff in. I got to do this in the first week of practice. We can get to that stuff later. And so and not to say that that's a wrong, there's no right or wrong here. I just think that there perhaps is one way to do it, and then maybe a better way to do it, or something that makes a little bit more sense to somebody who's looking to add that competitive edge to their program. So this is the second day of practice in 2017. So 2017-18. So not this past season, but the season before that, when I was at South County. And you'll see, we start with a transition game. We go straight into stretching, form shooting, right there, decision making, a rebounding game, or a free throw game. So 5 minutes, we give them a scoring template. Got this from John Carrier, who's up, I believe, in Michigan or Minnesota. I can't actually remember where he's from, but great coach up there. And I just saw this on Twitter. I was like, hey, you know what? My kids are going to love it. And we're getting straight into putting in our transition, straight into another free throw game, playing 1-on-1, playing 3-on-3. And then down here, we're getting them into 5-on-5, more shooting, and then competitive Spurs cutthroat. And I'll go through what some of the rules of this are. But yeah, it's a 120-minute practice, so 2 hours. And we have numerous competitive segments, and we're still building our systems and how we're trying to play, but we're doing it through the game. And we're building up 1-on-1 to 3-on-3 to 5-on-5 in this particular practice on the second day of practice. and getting our pillars in, understanding how we're communicating these things. What is and is not controllable? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to do it? And it's really that last one, the how are we trying to do it? So in this 3-on-3 conversion, one of our big things in transition defense was working on sprinting, pointing, and talking. Well, if we have 5 players out there on each team, that's 10 bodies for us to watch. So we're going to put it at 3-on-3. So there's only 6 bodies for us to watch. So each coach can take a couple of kids and be fine. Now, if it's just you, do this one 2-on-2, and then you can watch every kid. If they're not sprinting, pointing, and talking, we blow it dead because that's a behavior. It's not a tactic. And so we're not even going to get to the tactic of how do you turn your body, how do you manipulate the ball, all of that stuff, if we're not working on these things first that drive the rest of that. You must self-organize and figure it out. So this is the way I structured our practices, and this was the second day. I don't remember if we got to all of this, but I'm pretty sure we did. So right here is something we're going to go into is 100-point games. And this was sort of the way that we tested those standards. Like just on the second day of practice, where are we 5-on-5? No press break, no nothing. We're just going to play up and down, 5-on-5, very few stops. But what we really want out of this is our shot selection. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to get our shot selection. Defense gets 99 points for taking a charge. We haven't even touched defense here, but if they can rotate, and we're going to see where their habits are, if they can rotate, boom, they're going to take that charge. They get 99 points for playing to 100. So then, moving from there, let me reshare this here. I'm just going to show like a beginning, middle, and close to the end practice plan. So this practice plan on this particular day, we only had 9 players. And a lot of times I hear an excuse like, oh, we don't have enough bodies, we don't have this. Like kids don't sign up to play basketball to run drills. And I was a kid, like I didn't get to play in high school, like I wasn't good enough. And not saying that it was anything to do with the way I was coached, that was on me. Like I didn't know how to work on my game. But the more I've read, the more I've experienced, the more I've seen, the important thing is how can we make this fun and joyous for kids? And it's fun to go through these processes. Fun is such an adulterated word. I think that it's like, oh, it's carefree, there's no consequences, no nothing. If you ask kids what is fun, it's playing with my friends and doing things well. Those two things come up over and over and over again. So we're going to force that to happen. We're going to force you to have that level of fun according to what's fun for our program. So in this particular practice, this was day 18 of practice, kind of like right there before winter break, kind of a trap type practice too, with 9 kids. Like we could not go hard or kids would kind of blow it off. We had really, really good kids. But that was part and parcel of the culture we had built of not having the excuse of like, okay, kids are hurt, next person up. And that's why it's important that everybody gets first team reps, because you never know when that 13th kid on the bench, all of a sudden he or she is going to become a starter for you. And if they're not ready or you don't trust them to put them in the game, a lot of times that's not really their fault. Now, a lot of times it is, but we have the ability to influence that through our leadership and the way that we influence the environment we create in practice, where everybody gets those opportunities to show what they have and to learn. So in this one, and I will show you the tracker as well for this. So we used these trackers, and we still use them at Brandeis too. We just changed the name and put the drills at the top. There were 13 competitive segments in this practice in 120 minutes with 9 players. And so if you think about, and I'll get to this tracker here a little bit more later, but you
Hey,
think about that. Yeah.
No, I know what you're talking about. We just can't see it.
Oh, sorry.
See still. I know what you're talking about, but
yeah, it's in a different window. Let me just, you know what? I'm just going to share my whole desktop. How about that? That way you see what I see. Can you see it now?
yep, perfect.
Perfect. Yeah. So this was our tracker. The kid wins. We put an X in there. And there's 13 competitive segments in a 120-minute practice. So let every 9-ish minutes, a kid has a chance to win something. It's like being at a carnival, but it's all stuff that we want to do, and it's stuff that we want to be really good at. And it fits in those pillars of play. It fits in our game model, and we are coaching our standard. And this was the day before a game. So we have 2-hour practice, 13 competitive segments, 9 kids, and we go out the next day with those same 9 kids and blow the other team out by double digits. And that team went to the state final 2 years in a row, the 2 years before that. So it can be done, but it goes back to the relationships that you have with your kids and how much they're willing to fight for your standard. And those are processes that take place that, you know, we can talk about those until we're blue in the face, because that's really what matters here. But that's how you get to this. So just looking at this practice plan again, this is December 17th. And a lot of it starts the same way. Prehab, a transition game, so keep away. This was our press break. So we literally played monkey in the middle, 6-on-6, or here it was 5-on-4. Just the length of the court within the volleyball lines, and you get points for every completed pass. And so right then and there, kids within the first 10 minutes have a chance to win, and all they have to do is complete passes. But in that, like Mike McKay likes to say, we're getting the vegetables in the spaghetti sauce. So we're getting passing, catching, pivoting, not traveling, ensuring that we're throwing on time, on target passes, hitting the standard of all of those things. Basketball decision training, shooting. That's something from Chris Oliver. Again, fantastic resource on basketball immersion. A lot of the things that we did were straight from him and just adapted for our program. Getting another free throw shooting game, a full team shooting drill, and then going into one-on-one. So we knew that we were going to get zoned. So changing the constraints in our one-on-one to simulate how we wanted to score against a zone. That same conversion drill from the second day of practice, now we're doing it 2-on-2. So we've got 4 groups of 2. One of them has 3. We were a full court man-to-man press team. We didn't put in zone presses. We didn't trap any of that stuff because we also didn't have shot clock. So we really just wanted to pressure you up and down the floor and make you work harder, not necessarily get a bunch of steals and all of that stuff and run time off the clock. We didn't want to do any of that. But this is how we got to that mentality. Another free throw game, team shooting, 2-on-2 to 3-on-3. And again, it just continues. And so even with 9 kids, we were still able to play 4-on-4, still get exactly what we wanted out of that practice. And then the last one, I guess that's the only one. And then just one from January that I was going to show has slightly less competitive segments as we moved later on in the season, but they were longer. And so if I were to do it again, I would probably stick with those quick hitting ones. But again, that was like January 9th, I think, and our season ended February 15th or 16th. So we had about a month left in practice. So we were also going about 75, 90 minutes. So just less time, but still just as competitive and tracking everything. Some of those high yield concepts, and I'll make this bigger here, in terms of the mental transition games, and I have 2 videos to show you as well. I'll put these all up here. Any variation of tag. So when I say transition games, this is not like transition offense where we're running lanes and stuff. It is literally a mental transition into the workout. And so we would do these before lifting. We would do them before conditioning, before practice. If there was a lull in practice, we might throw one of these in there. And so we use them to our benefit, like athletic preparation, trying to get our kids moving around in a basketball way before we even stretched, trying to get us moving and trying to get those movement patterns down, learning to start, stop, accelerate, decelerate. So maybe we throw in tag, like you can't plant on one foot, you got a hockey stop today, teaching that and then letting them go do it. 2 of my favorites, and ironically, they're not the videos that I'm going to show because I couldn't find videos of these. Keep away, which turned into our press break. So again, I explained that a little bit earlier, but we would use the volleyball lines all the way around the court. Completed passes or points, we played to a time or we played to a score. And you'd be amazed at how difficult it is to complete those passes within the volleyball line because, and I don't know why, but it was very, very hard. And so I felt like if that was something that engaged their mind and they had to figure out, how am I going to get this pass over there? There's no basket. There's no point of reference for where I need to pass the ball. I just need to find the open person. What I found was that in the midst of chaos, they would be able to find the open person. And then the other one was ultimate basketball. So essentially exactly what it says: replace the frisbee with a basketball, go score touchdowns. Um, and our kids loved it. And it was just 5-7 minutes here at the beginning of practice where we're still getting some skill work in, but it's live and it's playing the game. So here's a couple videos of two of the other ones. So push up tag and rock paper scissors tag. Now push up tag, this is my team at WT Woodson High School. This is before a conditioning workout. We're out on the outdoor tennis courts at the school. And this is push up tag. So you can see that they're in push up position and they're trying to tag each other's hands. Hopefully this video is coming across well. And the goal was to get 5 hand tags of your partner before they tag you 5 times. And so that's something I got from an MMA workout that I think I saw it on Twitter and I was like, hey, that's kind of neat. Let's use it. You know, and it doesn't have to be just basketball related stuff, but you see them, they're like playing with joy. They're having a good time. There's a group of 3 back here at the very end. And again, you can play with as many kids as you want. And they're just, it warms up their mind. It warms up their body for the workout. It's something different to get them from sitting all day in class and then onto the court. It's like, hey, I'm ready for this workout. This video is not mine. This is from Brian McCormick. He posted this on YouTube. This is rock, paper, scissors tag. But if you can imagine, the kids have a ball in their weak hand or in their off hand. That's the only difference. So in this instance with these 2 little boys, the loser chases. And so we would give the rule, hey, today loser chases. And that's all we would say. And again, you would watch them sort of synapse in their mind, like, wait, loser chase. All right, hold on, let me figure this out. And then they'd go play and they'd end up running into each other. Or they wouldn't be communicating about like loser chases, or they didn't know, like it was not as quick as you'd think it would be. And it's something simple of playing rock, paper, scissors, but there's decision making there. Which one do I throw? Where do I go? Who's chasing? What do I do here? How can I get away? So we're building some of those habits into how they play, but we're not doing it just lining up, running a drill. So there you see like the little girl right here in the purple, she lost, or no, she won. And then she thought she had to chase. And so then she got tagged. So we give them points too, and like whoever got the most points in that particular one would win. So just two examples there, and I would say throw those into your practice plan, and you'll see the engagement and the energy. You'll see that over the course of time that it will increase. This is one of our players here. Her name's Emma Revis. She's from Miami, Oklahoma, and she's really, really good playing one-on-one. She's a fantastic one-on-one player. And so she benefits from playing one-on-one every day. That was something that Sherry Cole said in a clinic a long time ago, but she talks about it all the time. Like when she was learning from, I think it was Dan Hayes was the coach at the school she went to, and she was learning from him. His advice to her was, hey, play one-on-one every day. And they do. The practices I got to sit in on at Oklahoma and learn from Sherry Cole when I was a student there, they do. They play one-on-one every single day. And you see the way that they play, their players are both individually skilled, but also team skilled. And I think the game is to the point now where we have so many skilled players to run a continuity offense, to do all of those things is like, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when the player's skill level is so high that we can put them in situations where they can utilize that skill level and not have to adhere to these strict patterns. But you only get there by increasing their confidence by playing one-on-one every day. So some of the constraints that we might change are like time and space, shot selection. Like, you can't take a jumper. You have to take a layup. You have to score in the paint. You got to score on the left side, whatever. How many dribbles they get, which hand they get to use, how the defense starts. So are they starting at an advantage? Are they starting at a disadvantage? Are they starting neutral? Is it on a post entry? Whatever it is. And then we create finishing. So if you look down in the bottom left quadrant of this picture, you'll see her driving from around the wing, like in between the wing and the elbow. That was something we did a lot. where we're trying to drive it through the elbow, because we found in the film that's where a lot of our attack came from. And so being able to master, again, when we go back to, how do we do the things that happen the most? Well, if that happens the most, then we need to manufacture that micro moment in practice and then compete at it. So put a score on it, put a time on it. Whoever wins at that basket wins the whole thing. And then we build the one-on-one games from film, like I just said. High yield concepts, individual concepts. Again, BDT shooting, basketball decision training shooting from basketballimmersion.com. Go check it out. Chris does an incredible job. But decision making is a skill. And when I think about skill development, I really think that's decision development. And so a lot of times we say like players need to know why. That's true. But I think players even more so need to know when. And that's where decision making and decision training come into play, because if players can understand the context of why they're doing what they're doing, which becomes the when, then they're going to be that much better and they're going to think that much more quickly. So I saw, we see a lot of stuff about the Spurs 0.5 system and the rule of like you have to pass it, shoot it, move it, whatever within 0.5 seconds. We had the 1 second rule, but you only get that if you're repping decisions every single day. And so using basketball decision training shooting as the basis for that, and then building in those decisions within the little games that we play in practice, and going back to our pillars of play on what those decisions need to be, when do they need to be made. Practice planning now becomes like, how many decisions can I make my kids make? How many decisions can my kids handle? How can I push them further to be making those decisions faster and for the benefit of our team? And then just shooting again, like I'm not going to go too far into shooting. We do have like a full shooting program that I've been using for a few years. A lot of it comes from Mike Neighbors, who's at the University of Arkansas. Um, I think shooting needs its own time. That's really the most important thing to me about this whole slide. Like I can take the rest of it off. But creating some pace with that shooting, making sure there's time, there's score, there's a benchmark that they got to hit, whatever it is, but really getting great reps in shooting and coupling that with decision making and pace. So some of our high yield concepts, I talked about Spurs cutthroat. I'm not going to go through all of these. Just in the interest of time, like I don't know what the time is right now, but just to go over a few of them, like Spurs cutthroat, if I could only do 1 or 2 drills for the rest of my coaching career, Spurs cutthroat would be one of them. We play it 3-on-3 or 4-on-4, depending on how many kids we have. Generally, if you have 12 kids, you make 4 teams of 3. Anything under 12, you want to go 3-on-3. If you have like 16 kids, like I had one year, you can play it 5-on-5. It really doesn't matter. The point is, it's how you score the game and what it really matters in your program. So for me, sprint was one of the pillars of play. So that's a behavior, it's a decision. You're either sprinting or you're not. So if you failed to sprint onto the court on the offensive side, you didn't get to play. You lost your opportunity to lose a turn, you're off. And so the way that it works is the only way you can score is by getting a stop. And so for us, we just simplified what getting a stop was. I don't care what happens within the possession. If you get a rebound, you get a deflection and a steal, or the offense throws the ball out of bounds, or they turn it over, that's a stop. Now, if we're a no middle team, then I might say, hey, if you let them into the paint, your stop is nullified. For me, I didn't really care about all that. Like we were a no middle team as well, but the ball was going to get into paint, especially if we were doing what we were supposed to do on offense. There's just so much give and take that happens. So I was more concerned with, did we get a stop or not? If you get a stop, you stay. If you get scored on, offense goes to defense for the opportunity to score points now. So we're creating that get-to mentality of playing defense instead of, now we have to go play defense. No, the only way you can score in this is to get a stop. And so like I get pigeonholed sometimes as an offensive guy. I'm not an offensive guy. I'm not a defensive guy. I'm a basketball coach. So at the end of the day, like we still need to get stops. Here's how we build that mentality right here. So our offense, they can do whatever they want. Like I'm paying maybe 10% attention to them. Are they sprinting on and off the court? That's really all I care about. For the defense, I'm on them like white on rice. I want to make sure that they're communicating. If they're not communicating, boom, you get sent off, right? If you allow an offensive rebound, boom, get off. If you have your hands on your shorts, off. If there's a, if you're, what was the other, there's another one, I can't remember. Oh, if you foul, you're off. That's it. You don't get to play again. And so really kind of creating that perfect possession type mentality of, we're going to be so good at what we do that if we handle these four things, if we don't allow offensive rebounds, we keep our opponents off the free throw line, if we're constantly communicating and we don't take a second to rest by putting our hands on our shorts, we're going to be just fine. And play to 7, whoever gets to 7 first wins. The other two teams have sprints. I would do that every day. If I was, if I could only do 1 or 2 drills for the rest of the time, I would do that one every single day, just to build that mentality. But then also like show that, hey, if we just handle our non-negotiables, it doesn't matter what the other team does. We use this in Scout a lot. So we would have 3-player actions or 4-player actions and have our kids run them. And our defense is just trying to stop all of that, but then continue playing that possession for 10 or 15 seconds. So it moves really fast. The kids get really into it because they don't want to run that sprint, but also it's fun. Like then that's the infectious joy that we want kids to play with. And then here's as far as team games. So again, I only went through one of these 5. If anybody has questions or anything, I'll put my contact information back up there. We can go through more of them, or we can talk about practice like your specific situation as well. But one of the ones that I'm really passionate about in this is 100-point games. And this is something that I don't really know. I don't remember where I got it or what the impetus was for it. I think it was a combination of seeing Mike Neighbors' quick strike drill, and then also knowing that, being a math business type guy, I wanted to try to create some sort of formula that I could give to my kids and say, hey, look, here's the things that we really want to do. If we do these things, I don't care how we get to this, but this is what I want the anatomy of our possessions to look like. And we're going to play to 100 in practice and see what happens. And so I'll get to that here in a second, but one of my other favorite ones on this is defensive challenge. And that's something that I didn't know about until, I didn't call it defensive challenge, but that's something we do at Brandeis a lot. We actually track it on the sidelines. And in the drill, it's 5-on-5 full court. You get 1 point on the scoreboard for score, stop, score, or stop, score, stop. So any of those combinations within our play, you get a point on the scoreboard. First to 3 wins. And that's really helpful. And because we chart it in games, now we can have that common language in games too, of our practices are transferring to the games. And I think that's sometimes where we get hung up, is like, well, this doesn't transfer to the game, or I do these drills, but I don't see them show up in the game. This is something that does, because it creates the context of, here's what we're trying to do, here's how we do it, and we're going to measure it. And it goes back to that human component and the objective controllable feedback. Did you get the stop, score, stop, or score, stop, score, or not? If you did, great, you won. If you didn't, then maybe nobody won. Maybe it was a tie for that series of 3 possessions, and we're going to go again. But anyway, those are things that definitely show up in the games. And I'll show you some clips here of how that works. So just to share this with you, this is my scoring system for 100-point games. Everybody's scoring system can and should be different. It's about what you emphasize. So it's sort of that old adage of like, it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. Well, this is what I emphasize. So we want to play fast. We want to get the ball up and down. So a pitch ahead is the most important and most valuable thing in 100-point games for us. If we go early opposite, so a pitch ahead and switching sides, that's even more valuable. So we can go 15 points for that. Same thing if we hit a rim runner ahead. So in the context of watching your film, of planning practice, of teaching how you want to play, this is how we created that scoring system for my program. And this was in conjunction with Kyle Cavanaugh. We've been thought partners on this stuff for years. but really kind of hammering it down to what's essential of, hey, we're going to pitch ahead. We want to get the ball to switch sides, touch the middle, and we want to take a great shot. So we have a shot rating scale 3, 5, 7, 9, which I can explain, very briefly. A 7 is in rhythm, in range, uncontested, and a 9 is a wide open layup. So those are the shots we want to hunt the most. So a 7 is going to look different for every kid, but for the most part, if we can get like a 1 more 3, if we can get a wide open, in rhythm, uncontested, in range shot, that's what we want. And you better take it when we have it, because those are hard to come by. And then we want to work for a layup. If we can work for a layup, great, let's do it. And so we create this scoring and then we play. And so in practice, we'll put up 15 minutes on the clock, and our managers, we had eighth graders, future players in our program. As eighth graders, they were running the clock, and literally we'd have an assistant coach stand there and just shout out what was going on. And probably by the second month of the season, they were able to just score the game on their own on the scoreboard. So if you have help, great. If you have an assistant that can do it, if you have an eighth grade manager, if my eighth grade managers can do it, anybody can do it. And so we would play to 100, and we got usually 2 or 3 rounds in 15 minutes, because it goes pretty fast, especially because of how fast paced the game becomes. But then what we can do on the backside is, when we play, our kids start understanding, hey, that was a 40 some odd point possession. And they may be off by a few, but they're counting, because they want the highest value possessions possible. And so what we like to say is, if we could average 30 points on possessions in the half court, we were probably going to win the game. Kyle used to use the phrase 79-30. That was just a reminder for his kids. For us, it was, hey, 100-point possessions. Let's go get 30s. Let's go get 30s. Shoot your 7s and 9s. Hunt 7s and 9s. Let's get a 30-point possession. And if it got more than that, great, because there's going to be some where, your point guard goes coast to coast. That's not necessarily going to be a high yield possession. So, it's nice when that happens, but we can't rely on that to happen. What can we rely on, though? We can rely on switching sides. We can rely on completed exchanges of the ball. We can rely on our team to pitch ahead. So we combine the elements of, yes, my point guard at South County was freaking amazing. She just go coast to coast if she wanted to. We called those roadrunner layups. Well, if she did that, she may only get 11 points or 15 points out of that on this rating scale if she switched sides with the ball or whatever. So, she may not get 30 points on that possession, but on the next one, we might get 40. So it averages out to around 30. So what I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to pull up, I have a thread on my Twitter, and it's pinned at the top of my Twitter. So if you want to go look at it, that'd be, it's there for you. Please leave comments, whatever. I'm super accessible on all of this stuff. But here's just a clip, and this is from my high school team. This is not from Brandeis. I have not gotten around to clipping Brandeis film yet. That's kind of on my project here. But I started with my team from last year and sort of created this thread about some of this stuff. So you see here, defensive challenge, we score, stop, score, or stop, score, stop, and then 100-point game. So we get a 32-point possession and an automatic win for a charge. So if we just watch this clip, hopefully you guys can see this and it shows up well. So here we're coming down, we push it ahead, and we're just moving the ball around. Again, we don't have a shot clock, but we used a shot clock in practice though, because I didn't want us to have these 1.5-minute long possessions. That just bugs me out. So we get that 3 to go. That's a 32-point possession based on our scale. And we come down here and we take a charge, and that's an automatic win. So we got a stop. That's what leads off this possession. We get a rebound and a push. We go down, we score, we come back and we get another stop, and it happens to be a charge. So right there, we won 2 drills from our practice. We won defensive challenge for a score, stop, score, or a stop, score, stop, and 100-point games. We got a 32-point possession and an automatic win for taking the charge. So if we come down here and we look at, another one of these possessions, this is a 26-point possession. So right here, it's 1, 2, 3, and now here, this is the figure it out part. The kid dribbles into the short corner, and instead of freaking out, she's getting double teamed by two pretty long kids. She can keep her composure because we've in practice, and she's a pretty good player. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from her or saying that it's because of how we practice, but there's an element to in practice, we don't bail out these types of situations. We are constantly saying we need to thrive in chaos, figure it out. Thrive in chaos, figure it out. Thrive in chaos, figure it out. And a simple kick out now creates a 2-on-1 at the top. BDT shooting right there, drive, post feed, switch sides, and we nail another 3. Right? That same kid who was freaking out just a second ago is able to compose herself. One of the things I wanted to show was another big, yeah, okay, so a 49-point possession. And when we talk about self-organization, that's what this is right here. And you'll see, like in the description on this tweet, like, yeah, we get the early opposite, all of that, like we should be good, but then we make a bad pass and it goes back to neutral. So when we're talking about seeking those big advantages and the small, or taking the small advantages and making them big advantages, like Saba, like Brian McCormick's, and Brian McCormick's the one that came up with that. His book is amazing. And so we tried to play that way. And so when we go back to neutral here because of a bad pass, you'll see, so here's early opposite. That we counted as a pitch ahead. So early opposite, make the defense shift. Right, and there's our freshman post player throws a bad pass. So now we're back to neutral. We had the defense on shifting. We're back to neutral, but we end up getting that to go anyway because they were able to self-organize, and it wasn't like I had to stand there. I'm down here talking to my assistant coach, like down here at the end of the bench. They self-organized and they played because those are the situations we were in practice every single day. Every single drill, every single competitive segment, that's what we were looking for them to self-organize. And I'll show one more here. So not only do they have to be in the half court, like they can also be in transition. So you'll see here, a pitch ahead, get the ball to the middle, so that's 15. Pitch ahead is 10, get to the middle is 15, switch sides is another 5, so that's 20. 7, so in rhythm, in range, uncontested, plus the make, and I believe this is a 3-point shot, so that's 10. That's a 30-point possession, and we get it in under 10 seconds. And this is what we were looking for all the time. So we would purposefully practice this, right? She drives the 45, kick out, 3. And this is that game when I was talking about the practice that we had with 9 players. This is the game the next day, right? That's what we were looking for. And so we just tried to manufacture this over and over and over again. And we celebrated what we wanted to see and tried to root out some of the habits we didn't. But that goes to the idea of hacking your standards. What was our standard of play? What did we want to do? How did we want to do it? And it was more important of how we did it rather than what we did. There's a million ways for us to score. There's a million ways for us to get a stop. It comes down to our character, which is the repeatability of those positive habits. Character doesn't mean you just have really good kids. We had really good kids, but that doesn't mean they were high character in terms of basketball. So if we say we need to get our foot on the baseline to cut off a baseline drive, it takes character to do that. And so having high character players means that they're upholding their habits and upholding the standards of our program in the best way possible. And so that's what we were trying to do. And if you think about the pyramid, like it goes back to the recruiting and the relationships and recruiting your kids every single day to be a part of your program and live that standard, but then developing their leadership and character too on and off the court so that they are making those good choices and building in those choices in practice. It all works sort of synergistically. I'm trying to find, there's one more. We had like a 60-point possession, but I know we're running short on time here.
You
I
guys
don't know.
much?
I'll look through it, and if I see it, I'll retweet it and I'll tag you there, Ben, so you can see it. But sort of getting to the end here. So why do 100-point games and all of this stuff that we're talking about with competitive practice design, of competing in practice, of using these trackers, of playing the game sense approach, all of that. So in terms of 100-point games, sometimes we get mad at kids who all they can do is reverse the ball. Why? If that's all that kid can do, they're doing us a service. They're helping us switch sides of the floor and they're throwing an on time, on target pass. For us, that's 6 points on our 100-point game scale. So that's 6% of winning the game. Now, if I feel like I'm important enough, I'm going to do that. If I feel like that's valued by my team and my coaches, maybe I didn't get an assist, but I got a hockey assist out of that. Great. I don't care about that stat. But when we hit the game winning basket, because I do that, I know my teammate's going to give me credit when the newspaper asks about it. Hey, you hit that shot, whatever. Yeah. Ben threw a great pass and, he reversed it. We switched sides of the floor. It was a safe exchange. So using that language, like at 2 places now, I've been accused of having cult-like language. I am totally fine with that. I want our kids to feel so special about the language that we use that anybody who walks in our gym, they'd be like, what are they talking about? Nobody needs to know except for us. So every facet of a possession, then, when we score games, the way we score 100-point games, when we score Spurs cutthroat or perfect possession or defensive challenge, every facet of the possession now becomes part of scoring. And so we go back to those really destructive questions. Did you win? How many points did you score? Well, now everything leads to scoring. And so we break it down in those games and we show, like, hey, these are the things that are important to us. Here's how you can affect the game positively. And it's attainable by every single player on our team. And so that creates ownership and buy-in. And so now if the scoreboard reflects my positive contribution, I can star in my role. And we've returned back to the human component being the most important thing that we do. And so as coaches, if we can understand this part, if we can understand that the human component matters so much and we tend to neglect it, especially as we get further into the season, we're scouting, we're doing all this other stuff, like, we still have people in front of us and we need to be really, really intentional about building those relationships, recruiting them every single day to our standard, helping them develop their leadership and character so that we can have this environment where the standard is the standard and everybody's striving together in that competitive environment, rather than just doing this and we pit kids against each other, which then causes friction and anxiety. So just to finish up, here's how we track all of that. I showed you the paper tracker. We would print that out every day. The managers would mark it up, and then I would put it, when I was the head coach or now even as an assistant at Brandeis, that's my job. This on the left, you'll see right here, the thing that starts with Hannah. This was our daily tracker. So this was a Google sheet that we just shared with the whole staff and all the players. I went in there and put in some formulas, had a winning percentage, total number of wins, how many days did they win, so where they had the most wins that day in practice, and then each day. And their little rectangle there, their little cell turned green if they had more than 3 wins for the day, and then if it was bold, they won that day. And so you'll see, like, Hannah ended up being honorable mention all league. Emma was that freshman I was talking about with the cool graphic, the one-on-one slide. Lauren was a senior this year. Sam played great minutes for us. Francesca was a freshman this year. And then Camila down there in the middle, she was second team all league for us. And then on the right, we did somewhat of the same thing, but in a different competition. And that was in 2016 with our off-season shooting program, or our improvement season shooting program, which we're doing for the first time this year at Brandeis. So really excited to see the results of that as well. So that's all I have. I tried to keep it at an hour. Again, there's my contact information. If anybody wants to talk basketball, needs help with any of this stuff, please shoot me an email. Follow me on Twitter. Follow the hashtag Essential Coaching on Twitter. We're putting out content every single day to try to help with some of this stuff. And yeah, feel free to text me, call me, whatever. I'm available. I'm just here to add value and to serve in any way that I can.
Jeff, you got anything?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go as far back as I did earlier. This is going back to April 28th of this year. You tell me, the question you asked on Twitter, what does it mean to be outcoached? Ben answered on Twitter. What do you think?
I think it's doing all this stuff, honestly. I think the preparation that you create and the environment that you create in practice, and the culture that you create doing this and handling the human component, that to me is out coaching. I think there's obviously like in-game adjustments and stuff like that, but I think that gets so overblown. Like I think that's 1% of what we do as coaches. So, the short answer to a shorter question is this. Like, if we can handle this and the human component, that to me is out coaching.
Thank you. That's all I have.
It's a great question.
Do you remember my response?
Do I remember your response?
Or him?
I don't know. I could go back and look. I don't remember. What was it?
My answer was, if you don't know why you got out, or if you don't know why you lost, you got out coached.
Oh, hey, fair enough. There you go. Yeah, that's an even shorter answer to a question.
But I remember, I wasn't looking back through my notes, but I knew the 100-point game was one of the biggest takeaways I came away with when I watched you previously. So it was really great to revisit that and also add some new stuff in. So like you said, you can change the 100-point game however you want, whatever you're coaching, whatever you want to get out of your team, that's what you emphasize. Like, I've heard how many people say it. So just looking over.
Yeah, like when we first put it together, we were big on like off-ball screens. So getting back screens, getting, down screens, whatever. So we would give them 5 points for setting an off-ball screen, but then nobody was getting open because they were all just trying to screen for each other. So it turned into a mess. So your kids then sort of hack the game and you have to adjust. But yeah, you emphasize whatever you want.
I love that mental transition games as well, because, at the high school level, they're literally coming right out of school, so then they're meeting in the hallways with all their friends. They're like at the relay stage, and we got to get them, fired back up and doing the slide drill and stuff to start practice. It's great for a little bit, but, to keep their mind working, I really, really love that. So we're going to stay.
Go ahead.
I don't have anything else to add. It's great stuff. So.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you guys having me on. And, if there's anything else I can do to help you guys, please don't hesitate to ask. And if anybody that sees this, wants to talk basketball or whatever, I'm always down. So again, I'm just here to serve and add value in any way that I can. And I appreciate y'all for having me.
No problem. We will talk soon. This will be posted in the next couple of days. You'll see it. I'll tag you, and we'll talk in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
See ya.
Yep. Bye-bye.